The year is now, the missiles are loaded, the warships are in position, the world is watching, and Iran has a choice. Every major power on the planet has called for a ceasefire. The United Nations has issued emergency resolutions. The United States has issued its final warning, and still, Iran has not blinked. So today on What If Z, we ask the question that military strategists, world leaders, and intelligence agencies are losing sleep over. What if Iran refuses to ceasefire? What happens in the first 24 hours, the first week, and what does the world look like if this thing goes all the way? Before we dive in, if you're new here, this is What If Z, where we take the world's most dangerous what if scenarios and break them all the way down. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this is one episode you do not want to miss a single second of. Let's get into it. To understand what happens next, we need to understand where we are right now. Iran has been in an open state of conflict, not just through proxies anymore, but directly. Iranian ballistic missiles have struck Israeli territory. U.S. forces in the region have been attacked. American carriers are positioned in the Persian Gulf. The ceasefire window, that fragile, 72-hour diplomatic corridor brokered by Qatar and Turkey, is now expiring, and Iran's supreme leader has not signed it. Why? 3 reasons, and each one is a bomb of its own. Iran's hardliners, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, have been waiting years for this moment. To them, backing down now would be a catastrophic show of weakness. The supreme leader's legitimacy at home depends on not blinking. If Iran ceases fire now, the narrative inside Iran becomes, America won, and that is politically unsurvivable for the regime. Iran has spent decades building what they call the axis of resistance: Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various militias in Iraq and Syria. These groups are already in the fight. If Iran ceases fire unilaterally, it abandons every single one of those allies mid-battle. That is not just a military calculation. That is an existential betrayal of Iran's entire foreign policy identity. Here is where it gets terrifying. Western intelligence agencies have assessed that Iran is weeks, possibly days, away from having enough enriched uranium for a functional nuclear device. Not a deliverable weapon yet, but enough material. Iran knows that the moment they test or announce a weapon, the entire calculus changes. A ceasefire now could allow the US and Israel to take out their nuclear program. From Tehran's perspective, why stop now when you're so close? This is the logic of a regime that believes it has nothing left to lose, and that, historically speaking, is the most dangerous kind of actor on the world stage. The 72-hour window expires. The US president delivers a statement from the Oval Office. The language is unambiguous. Iran has chosen the path of confrontation. The United States will respond accordingly. Pentagon sources confirm DEFCON 3, U.S. military at heightened alert. In Tehran, state television broadcasts the supreme leader calling it a declaration of war by the arrogant powers. Drop a comment right now. Do you think this scenario is actually possible? Let me know what you think is Iran's real endgame. I read every single comment. Iran does not wait to be hit. That is not their doctrine. Within hours of the ceasefire expiry, the IRGC launches a coordinated, multi-vector attack. Vector 1, the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian fast boats and submarines begin harassing and then blocking commercial shipping. The Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which 20% of the world's oil supply passes, is effectively closed. Vector 2, ballistic missiles. A salvo of Iranian Shahab and Fatah ballistic missiles are launched toward U.S. military bases in Iraq, Qatar, and the UAE. These are not warning shots. Vector 3, proxy activation. Simultaneously, Hezbollah begins the heaviest rocket bombardment of northern Israel in history. Houthi forces in Yemen launch cruise missiles towards Saudi oil facilities. Iraqi militia groups attack the U.S. embassy compound in Baghdad. Vector 4, cyber. A massive cyber attack, attributed to IRGC-linked units, takes down power grids in 2 Gulf states and briefly disrupts U.S. Central Command communications. The U.S. response, hours 2 through 6. The U.S. does not hesitate. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group launches the first wave of airstrikes. Tomahawk cruise missiles hit IRGC command infrastructure, ballistic missile launch sites, and radar installations across western Iran. U.S. Air Force B-52 bombers, positioned in Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, begin their 11-hour flight toward Iran. Everyone understands what that means. Israel, without waiting for U.S. permission, because they never do, launches its own strikes targeting Iran's remaining air defense systems. The USS Nimitz and USS Eisenhower strike groups converge in the Gulf of Oman, forming the largest U.S. naval concentration in the region since the Gulf War. The moment the Strait of Hormuz closes, oil markets lose their minds. Crude oil prices spike from $85 to $140 a barrel within 6 hours of trading. Global stock markets open to chaos. The Dow Jones drops 2,200 points in the first hour. Fuel prices at the pump begin rising in real time. Japan, South Korea, and China, all massively dependent on Gulf oil, begin emergency calls with their foreign ministers. This is not just a Middle East war anymore. This is a global economic crisis with a gun attached. Now here is the part most analysts miss. Inside Iran, the reaction is not simple. There is a significant portion of the Iranian population, particularly the educated urban youth, who have been protesting this regime for years. The Woman, Life, Freedom movement shook the country. When U.S. strikes hit Iranian military infrastructure, civilian casualties are inevitable. And civilian casualties unify populations, even populations that hate their own government, against the foreign attacker. The regime knows this. They want civilian outrage. They need the Iranian people angry at America. It is their most powerful domestic tool. Here's a question for you. Do you think the Iranian people support their government in this war scenario, or not? Comment below. This debate is real among geopolitical analysts. Here is the scenario every U.S. military planner has been dreading for 40 years. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Libya. Iran is a country of 90 million people, with a standing army of over 600,000 soldiers, a hardened and fanatical IRGC, extensive mountainous terrain, and a population that has been preparing psychologically for war with America since 1979. U.S. military doctrine says, no ground invasion. The playbook is air and sea power, degrade Iran's military capability without putting boots on the ground. But here is the problem. Airstrikes alone cannot destroy Iran's nuclear program. Most of those facilities are buried 80 to 100 meters underground. Even the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, the largest non-nuclear bomb in the U.S. arsenal, may not be enough. Which forces a terrible question. Do you use tactical nuclear weapons to destroy a nuclear program? That question has never been asked seriously in modern warfare, until now. Neither Russia nor China want a U.S. military victory in Iran. Not because they love Iran, they don't, but because a U.S.-dominated Middle East shifts the global balance of power dramatically. Russia's move, Moscow begins airlifting advanced air defense systems, specifically the S-400 and S-500, to Iran. They stop short of direct military involvement, but provide real-time intelligence sharing. Russian warships in the Caspian Sea become a tripwire the U.S. must watch. China's move, Beijing calls an emergency UN Security Council session, demanding an immediate ceasefire. China publicly announces it will continue purchasing Iranian oil in defiance of U.S. sanctions. Chinese naval vessels begin escorting Chinese oil tankers through contested waters. The U.S. now has to fight Iran while managing Russia and China simultaneously. This is the multi-front nightmare scenario. While the world is focused on Iran, Hezbollah launches its most ambitious operation in history. Over 3,000 rockets and missiles rain down on northern Israel on a single day, not the crude unguided rockets of previous conflicts. These are precision-guided missiles that Hezbollah has spent years receiving from Iran. Israel activates full military reserve call-up. 400,000 reservists are mobilized. Iron Dome is overwhelmed, not defeated, but overwhelmed by sheer volume. Some missiles get through. Cities like Haifa and Tiberias take direct hits for the first time. Israel faces the brutal math of a two-front war, responding to Iran directly while fighting Hezbollah on its northern border. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar are now in an impossible position. They host U.S. military bases. Those bases are already being used to launch operations against Iran, which means, in Iranian and Houthi targeting doctrine, they are already in the war, whether they like it or not. Saudi Aramco oil facilities are hit by Houthi cruise missiles. Fires visible from space burn at Abqaiq, the single most important oil processing facility in the world, for 4 days. Oil spikes to $200 a barrel, for the first time in history. $200 a barrel, let that sink in. What does that do to your country's economy? Comment where you're from and what that means for you. I want to hear from all over the world. The global economy in freefall. 20% of the world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. With that strait closed and Saudi facilities burning, the global supply shock is immediate and brutal. Europe, Germany, France, and Italy, which import heavily from the Gulf, face energy rationing within 2 weeks. The European Union holds emergency summits. Germany's industrial output begins slowing. Asia, Japan, and South Korea, with almost no domestic energy production, face economic paralysis. South Korea's semiconductor industry, critical to global electronics, faces power outages. Japan activates its strategic petroleum reserve. Africa, sub-Saharan nations, already stretched economically, face fuel price crises that trigger food distribution failures. The humanitarian impact in countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and Ethiopia is immediate and severe. United States gas prices hit $7, then $9 per gallon. Inflation, which had been cooling, explodes. The Federal Reserve is paralyzed. Raising rates would crash the economy, but doing nothing means inflation spirals. Let's take a moment to understand just how important this waterway is. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Every day, approximately 17 to 21 million barrels of oil pass through it. That is the lifeblood of the modern industrial world. Iran has spent decades preparing to close it. They have mining doctrine, fast boat swarm tactics, shore-based anti-ship missiles, and submarines, all positioned to make the strait a death zone for any ship that enters. The U.S. Navy can fight through it, but fighting through it takes time. And in that time, every day the strait is closed costs the global economy an estimated $1.2 trillion in annualized GDP loss. Back home in the United States, the political fracture is enormous. A significant portion of the American public, exhausted from Iraq and Afghanistan, does not want another Middle Eastern war. Anti-war protests erupt in major cities. Congress is split. The War Powers Resolution is invoked. The president faces constitutional challenges to the military campaign. Meanwhile, U.S. military families are on high alert. Reserve components are called up. The human cost becomes viscerally real in communities across America. The president's approval rating drops 14 points in 2 weeks, but also rises 8 points among a different demographic. America is deeply divided. And now we arrive at the scenario that no one wants to say out loud. U.S. and Israeli strikes have destroyed many of Iran's nuclear facilities, but not all of them. Deep underground bunkers at Fordo still have enriched uranium stockpiles and centrifuge cascades. Iran's military leadership faces a decision of historic proportions. Option A, use remaining nuclear material to rush toward a device. Announce it publicly. The deterrence logic: if Iran has a bomb, even a crude one, no one will invade. Option B, use it as a bargaining chip. Announce they have enough material and will weaponize within 30 days unless the US and Israel stop all operations and agree to security guarantees. Option C, transfer enriched uranium to a non-state actor or a proxy, a deniable nuclear threat that no missile defense can track. Option C is the nightmare that keeps every intelligence director on the planet awake at night. This is the section I want your opinion on the most. Which option do you think Iran would actually choose? A B or C? Comment below. This is the question that determines everything. Every war has an endgame. The question is which one, and in this scenario there are 3 realistic outcomes. None of them are good, but some are far worse than others. This is the most likely outcome. After weeks of devastating strikes, Iran's conventional military capacity is severely degraded. Oil revenues have collapsed. The population is suffering. Even hardline factions within the IRGC begin secret back-channel communications. China, which desperately needs Gulf oil to flow, becomes the unexpected mediator. Beijing brokers a ceasefire framework that includes Iran halting all offensive operations and withdrawing proxy forces, the US and Israel halting airstrikes, Iran agreeing to snap IAEA nuclear inspections, and sanctions being partially lifted in exchange for compliance. Is it a real peace? No, it is a frozen conflict, a ceasefire that buys time but solves nothing. The underlying tensions remain, but the immediate catastrophe is halted. The world exhales, oil prices slowly decline, but everyone knows this is not over. It is only the end of the first chapter. The sustained military campaign does something unexpected. It breaks the social contract between the Iranian regime and its people. With infrastructure damaged, economic collapse accelerating, and mounting military casualties, popular protests explode beyond anything seen in 2022. This time, elements of the regular Iranian army, distinct from the IRGC, begin refusing orders and in some cases joining protesters. The supreme leader retreats to a secure bunker. Factions within the regime begin competing for power. The IRGC fractures between hardliners who want to fight to the last and pragmatists who see the writing on the wall. The regime collapses. But here is the brutal truth about regime collapse. It does not automatically mean peace. A power vacuum in Iran, with massive military arsenals, nuclear material, and competing factions, could be more dangerous than the regime itself. Libya times 100. This is the low probability, civilization-altering outcome. Iran, facing total military defeat and regime collapse, executes option C. Enriched nuclear material is transferred. A crude radiological device, not a full nuclear weapon, but enough to make a major city uninhabitable, is detonated in a port city, or worse. Or Iran's desperate conventional strikes accidentally hit a nuclear facility in Israel. Or the cascading chaos pulls Pakistan into the conflict, and Pakistan does have nuclear weapons. The logic of deterrence, which has prevented nuclear use since 1945, breaks down. At this point, we are no longer discussing a regional war. We are discussing a civilizational event. The United Nations is paralyzed. The global economy enters depression. International supply chains collapse. Food systems in import-dependent nations begin failing. This is why, even with all of its failures, diplomacy exists. This is why ceasefire negotiations, frustrating, slow, imperfect, matter, because the alternative is not just suffering. The alternative is the unraveling of the world we know. I want to know, which ending do you think is most likely, and do you think the world's leaders are doing enough to prevent this? Comment. Let's have this conversation, because this is exactly the kind of thing people need to be talking about. Here is what I want you to take away from this. The Iran-US standoff is not just about two countries. It is about the architecture of the post-Cold War world, which has been fracturing for years, finally reaching its breaking point. It is about whether international institutions like the UN actually have power. It is about whether great powers can manage conflict without it spiraling into catastrophe. It is about whether the lessons of the 20th century still hold in the 21st. And honestly, the answer is not obvious. That is what makes this so important to understand. If this video made you think, if it surprised you, if it scared you a little, if it made you want to know more, then please, subscribe to What If Z right now. We do this every week. We take the scenarios the world is afraid to talk about, and we break them all the way down. Drop a comment, Iran, if you watched all the way to the end. I see every single comment. Let me know you were here. Share this video. Not because it's entertaining, though I hope it is, but because this is information people need to have. The more informed people are, the better the decisions we all make. Like the video if it delivered, and I will see you in the next one, because on What If Z, the questions never stop.